Check. 1, 2, check. Check. 1, 2.
Hello, everyone. I know this session was scheduled to start at 10:30, but there's some different time starts, and so we think that that's affecting people coming in the room. So I'm going to do a quick little roundup in the hallway, and then we're going to start. So in about a couple of minutes. Thank you. Okay, everybody, how are you all doing this morning? Oh, if this were a class, I don't know what you would get for participation. Um, well, I just want to thank you all very much for coming, first of all, to the CCA convening. We are very excited that you're here, and also for coming this morning. This is going to be an amazing discussion. I am extremely excited because I do have a little bias as a Louisianian. And, you know, we get a lot of bad press, but this was a wonderful thing that we were able to do in the state of Louisiana. And we're happy that we have our leaders from the state to come and share with you. I'm going to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce the panelists. I don't read bios because they're in CVent and you can read them. What I'm going to tell you is that I am so impressed always with Dr. Toya Barnes-Teamer and her ability to really bring it all together. She's the CEO and owner of Teamer Strategy Group, and she has done work in Louisiana across the nations with presidents and teams to really help us understand why this matters and how to do it right. And I think that when I look at leaders in the higher education and post-secondary space, someone who really is focused on making sure that we're keeping and centered, that we're accountable for our decisions and our actions, and that we share these things broadly, I think about Toya. And I am just very pleased that she has been able to guide me and lead me in this work, and that also that she's going to lead this panel, moderate this panel for us today. So I think this is going to be a great conversation, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nia. So since honestly, it's more of a discussion because literally I'm sitting with two friends and I won't tell all the stories about how I know each of them. But first I want to remind us of this particular session and why we're here. So this is Empowering Voices, Louisiana's Triumph, and I'm putting that in quotes, y'all, because we have some other environmental changes that are occurring in our state. But our triumph in advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion with legislative impact, and what that looked like in this last session. So many of you are navigating the difficult environment of advancing efforts to support students of color, first generation, and students from under-resourced communities during an era that can be hostile towards diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And what's so interesting about the categories that we're speaking to is, honestly, they all define me. As a native New Orleanian, growing up in the lower Ninth Ward, first generation, student of color, underrepresented, and under-resourced to go to college. And I'm also proud to say that all three of my degrees are from the state of Louisiana institutions. So I'm also, Nia, a very proud native of our state. So over the last couple of years, our programs have come under increased scrutiny, making it more challenging for student success professionals to engage in this work. The question on how to successfully counter these efforts to eliminate DEI programs routinely surfaces with institutional and system partners seeking models of how others are successfully addressing these challenges. Louisiana's success provides a roadmap for others developing strategies to address similar concerns in your states. The goal of this discussion is to describe the landscape of Louisiana, the actions taken to address pending and anti-DEI legislation, and lessons learned throughout this success. So we have two panelists, and I know where Nia is saying she doesn't like to read bios. I think I have to do this for these two individuals, or I'll start telling stories that I really should not be telling.
Short.
So we'll start with Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, who is the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Louisiana. She is currently the only female in the country to have served as the higher education leader in multiple states, both Louisiana and Colorado. She was recognized nationally as the 2020 Exceptional Leader by the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, which is SHEO. In 2022, she successfully led efforts to secure additional state funding of more than $150 million, the most significant strategic investment in Louisiana's higher education to date. But she did have some partners in that effort.
Absolutely.
Louisiana Board of Regents, Reid leads the state's talent development efforts focused on increasing educational attainment, erasing equity gaps, and increasing prosperity. To reach the state's goal of doubling the annual number of credentials awarded by 2030, she focuses on transformational policies and deep collaboration engagement in line with Regents' talent imperative. So I want to now go to, because she told me to keep it brief and short, but I do have to say she is a wife, proud mom to one of my favorite people, Bree. Yes. And also married to Henry, so we can't forget Henry, because he'll kill me. But I also want to introduce Dr. Jim Henderson, who is president of the University of Louisiana system. And I also want to acknowledge his beautiful wife, Tanya, who is sitting in the audience, who has always provided support. You know what they say, behind every great man is a greater woman.
Much greater.
It's an awesome woman.
So since Jim's appointment, he has led the University of Louisiana in the creation of a strategic framework that charges its universities to produce the most educated generation in Louisiana's history drive growth through public and private partnerships and research, and recruit, retain, and develop world-class faculty who educate students, empower employers, and enrich communities. There are various systemic functions that ensure success. One of the newest is Compete LA, a program designed to assist the 653,000 Louisianians in some college credit but no degree. But the other, for me, claim to fame for Jim is the fact that Jim's system board was the only system board in the last couple of years who made a commitment that every campus within his system had a DEI officer. Right. So we want to commend you for that as well, Jim.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned earlier, over the last couple of years, there's been an increase in efforts to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in college campuses across the nation. This has included the advancement of legislation in many states restricting states' ability to continue DEI-affiliated initiatives. And I can go through the list, but I'm going to choose not to do that. We would like to begin our conversation with each of you sharing your thoughts on this current national trend and its overall impact on higher education. And I'm going to start with ladies first.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm on Louisiana time. Delighted to be with my colleagues and friends here on this panel. You know, as I think about the national trends, I think about the responsibility we have to differentiate between the words and the work. And when people hijack words, we get caught up in a conversation that is far afield from what we do each and every day as educators, right? We are America's talent development arm. Our institutions produce students who fill great jobs and create great jobs.
That's right.
And that is the work that we have to do. So we sit here at a conference that has a theme of future ready, right? The path to being future ready is a path through our colleges and universities, our 2-year and our 4-year institutions. And so while there is significant rhetoric and significant division around what is DEI and what do these words mean, the real work, the real commitment that we have is to each and every day make sure that students come to us and that there's a pathway for them to be successful and that we are meeting them where they are and that we're asking the question, who's not here or who is not doing as well as the next individual and how do we better serve them? So that's the work that I think we are all called to do. Yes, there is a lot of energy around culture wars and other things, but the real foundational work that we are called to do in this space is to keep moving education forward. So I would say, for me, the trend is to separate the words from the work.
Thanks, Kim. Jim?
Well, I agree with exactly what she's saying. And first, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be on this stage with two of my dearest friends and one of my other friends in the front row, Margaret Montgomery Richard. The four of us have been in various roles in Louisiana higher education now for more than 2 decades. And it's, you look at the progress we've made over that time, it's something to be quite proud of. Even though we have a long way to go, miles to go before we sleep, if you will. But the political conversations around DEI have been a challenge in a number of states. And one of the things I think we've done well in Louisiana is not allow the caricature of DEI to become the concept about which we're having discussions. You see, what happens, and because we're all walking around with these platforms in our hands that can bypass traditional media, we're able to create narratives online that can go viral, especially when we choose buzzwords that resonate with the general public. And if you can create a caricature of an idea that is so scary to the layperson walking down the street who doesn't deal with this work every single day, you've created a very powerful tool that you can leverage towards political gain. And we see that taking place across the country. In fact, a very prominent national operative in this space was talking about critical race theory and said in a tweet, openly, overtly, that we have taken critical race theory, we have redefined it, and so now if anyone hears anything that sounds crazy, they'll associate it with critical race theory. You see, you take a concept You redefine it and you own it, and then that becomes the new battlefield. And I think what we've done in Louisiana is leverage the relationships that we have to have the conversation about the realities in Louisiana. And we know in Louisiana we've got tremendous disparities when it comes to wealth, when it comes to success, when it comes to college completion. You can look at populations from rural populations, populations from urban populations. You can look at populations of color and see some tremendous gaps when it comes to success. And when you look at the data is not political. It's just, it is what it is.
That's right.
And so we have to have specific strategies to change the data. And when the conversation is about data instead of caricatures, it puts us in a much more winnable position, I believe.
So that actually takes us from the national landscape and what has been created around DEI, specifically to the state of Louisiana. So Commissioner, my question for you is, as we shift from the national to state efforts, can you share with us an overview of the proposed DEI Louisiana legislation in the state?
Sure. So the legislation proposed last session, which was last spring, was to have K-12 and higher education report on all DEI programs, all DEI activities, offices, et cetera, and to ensure that the financial information, budgetary information was included, and that information would be collected from all colleges and universities in all K-12 schools, public schools in Louisiana, and submitted to the Appropriations Committee. So that was the conversation. It was not legislation to ban, it was legislation to collect and share information under the, I think, umbrella that there was a budget challenge. So that was the request. And I assume you'll ask us about what happened there, so I'll go into that. So I want to say something about this guy sitting next to me, because as we were watching, so the relationship of the commissioner and the system presidents is very strong, and we meet every month and we talk about issues all the time. And as we were watching this conversation unfolding in Florida and Texas, this guy sitting next to me says, this is going to come to Louisiana, and I'm going to lead the conversation about why this is not who we are. And so I know this conversation is going to evolve into what do we do in our state? And so when you have relationships that are deep and long-lasting, and you have diverse voices in an Empowering Voices panel, it matters, right? This cannot be a conversation led by minority individuals about the importance of minority individuals. It has to be a conversation from diverse and highly successful leaders about who we are and what we do. And I believe, and I'll let Jim speak to this, I believe of the success of having myself, Jim Henderson, and Monty Sullivan at the table, 2 white males, 1 African-American female, there was power in the conversation. 1, because we sat before a legislature that we have sat before for years. They have seen us come to talk about dual enrollment, to talk about workforce, to talk about faculty, to talk about funding. So we had the opportunity to say, you know us and you know who we are. We are in this all the time together. Don't forget that. This is not what this conversation is about. Stay the course. And also, I think it's important to recognize that in those deep relationships was trust and confidence in the leaders who were sitting before them. And I think that matters. If we were new kids on the block, first legislative session, I don't know that the work would have come out the way it did. But we sat there before legislators who we have visited in their own districts, who we've worked with on legislation for a very long time, and legislators who said, these are our people.
That's right.
And this is our commitment to the work. And so the conversation was very different, I think, Jim.
I agree, and if I could, I think one of the key parts of that conversation was what the commissioner did. It was legislation designed for us to report expenditures associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she says, what aspect of our operation is not associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion? It's not some discrete function that you can extract from the budget and put as a line item. everything we do. In every classroom, we're talking about this. In student organizations, we're talking about this. In administrative meetings, every meeting that we have. And so you can look at the totality of the higher ed budget and say, yes, this is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we're trying to advance all populations in Louisiana. And like any successful organization, you look at where there are gaps in performance, and you put interventions in to close those performance gaps. That is just a business imperative that everybody subscribes to. And so when you approach it with that language, okay, this is not maybe the demon that we're trying to exercise from the state budget. This is actually a core function of what we're trying to do in higher education. And the way that she was able to encapsulate that in a non-confrontational way, just in an explanatory way, it really took the steam out of the conversation in terms of those that were pursuing a different agenda, if you will.
So you all talked about the relationship of the commissioner with the presidents of the systems, the relationship with the legislators, and that trust that they have in your ability to move these agendas forward. We talked about the data, because when you look at the state of Louisiana, we can see how many people, however you're defining equity, whether that's by race, by gender, by socioeconomic background, by urban, rural, et cetera, for them, those individuals showed up in all of their constituencies as well. But Jim, the one area we haven't talked about, as the president of the University of Louisiana system, can you share with us the scope of conversations occurring across campuses regarding the proposed legislation and the expected impacts?
Yeah, that's a great way to frame the question, Toya, because it's, when you think of Louisiana, of course, Louisiana is in the Deep South.
Right.
But historically, we've been far more progressive than people will give us credit for. In fact, when Lincoln was trying to pass the 13th Amendment near the end of the Civil War, he was counting on Louisiana as in the affirm bucket for ratifying the constitutional amendment. And so we've always been on the forefront. Just a little plug for our beloved state. But when you look at these national conversations that have emerged, people immediately think about politics, and they see what's happened in Florida and in Texas, now what's happening in Wisconsin. What an interesting thing it is to watch that play out. And they say, okay, this is coming to Louisiana. And so there's a lot of angst. And so I work closely with faculty senates. This was kind of a new thing that emerged when we had some tenure legislation that was up. I brought the faculty senates of our 9 institutions together and said, I want you to work with me on language. And we're going to have some very collegial conversations around this instead of going to war over it. When this legislation passed, it was associated with some other bills that were a little bit more egregious in terms of trying to snuff out diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so we immediately engaged our faculty in this conversation. Then we had what was really a gift. A state party, the Republican Party, released a resolution around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, it has all the whereas clauses, and the whereas, the University of Louisiana system has strategies to ensure success among all populations and underserved populations, a number of things like this. And then the next whereas clause was, whereas DEI offices have become divisive commissariats and ideological engines trying to indoctrinate students. And I was like, okay, this was really a leap from us trying to advance all populations. So I just issued a statement. I said, the first part of this resolution, we absolutely agree with. In fact, we are so committed to the work that's described in this resolution, we thank the party for acknowledging it. The rest of it is so foreign to anything that occurs in our campuses in the state of Louisiana, it defies comment. So we owned it. We didn't back away from it. We said, you know what? I'm thinking about in a movie, Clear and Present Danger, an old movie, Jack Ryan, and he's working with the president, and the president's friend has been killed on a yacht, and it's very messy, $600 million, drug money, this kind of stuff. He says, this is going to be a PR nightmare. You need to distance yourself from it. And Harrison Ford says, no, I think you do the opposite. If they ask you if it was a friend, you say it was a close friend. If they ask you if it was a close friend, you say, no, it's a lifelong friend. You don't give them anywhere to go. And so when they ask us, are we committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we say, yeah, we're committed with our whole of our being because it's the right thing to do for Louisiana. And when we send that message,
Yeah.
thank you. it's very kind. It's the people that are working in this work on our campuses that really deserve that acknowledgement. And so I extend that to them. But when they see someone that's standing up unequivocally for their work, they can focus on the work and leave the politics to those of us in Baton Rouge that live in that cesspool of politics. And they can do the really forward-looking work that's going to fulfill the commissioner's plan to have Louisiana educated for the first time in our history. So,
I want to add first, not only just a shout out, because it takes courage, right, in this environment to be that clear about what we value. And Jim has a system with DEI officers. He has a phenomenal Black Male Initiative. He walks the talk on this issue. But the results, because I know you're going to ask about that too, Toya, and keep jumping ahead of your questions, was bipartisan support to leave that legislation in committee. Failed in committee, bipartisan support. Unique for Louisiana. Democrats and Republicans saying, we're not going to move that legislation forward. And while others across the state, and certainly my SHIO colleagues, were talking about what are you guys doing about DEI, and our board took a position unanimously in support of tenure and against the DEI bill. Other boards did as well. And they said, are you worried about retaliation in the budget? Are you worried about these things? And I said, we are checking with the leadership. We're talking with them in advance before we go to committee so they know what we're going to say. They know we're coming. But we have a personal and professional relationship that I feel is going to sustain us through this conversation. I knew we would win the debate. I hoped we would win the vote. But I didn't feel, I don't know, Jim, if you felt that. I never felt that there was going to be budgetary blowback or anything of that sort, because we had worked so hard to try to make sure everyone was clear before we went to the table about what we were going to do.
And these are legislators that we're having conversations with around the Maritime Academy, around hunger-free campus, Title IX, all of these things. And because we're having these constructive conversations, this was just another constructive conversation.
Right.
And when we can show them that the caricature is not really the reality in our state, it changed the entire conversation, and they were willing to work with us. But it was Kim mentioned the bipartisan effect. You had two very conservative legislators sitting right on the front row of the Education Committee, watching us and listening to every word, engaging in the conversation. And they were unabashed and said, there's no reason for us to go down this path. For now, this conversation is going to continue in the next legislative session and going forward, and we'll continue just to engage in good faith and do what's right for Louisiana.
So you took me to, because Kim, you've answered two of my other questions, but actually it's taken me to the fact that we are going to be under different leadership starting in January. And so when we are talking about our strategy moving forward in the state of Louisiana, but also in providing information to our other state colleagues about how they might be able to manage these situations. Kim, in your perspective, what is the role of the SHIELD's office in addressing these types of legislative initiatives? Because where we had this win, we need to prepare for others.
I think proactive conversations are really important. If you, for other states, if you are waiting until a bill is filed, you're far too late. You should be in conversations now. I'll use the free speech legislation as an example. We had several legislators, and one particular that we adore on House Ed, who's been very concerned about free speech. And Jim held an event on a college campus, invited him into the conversation to demonstrate how we make sure that all voices are heard and that this is not a liberal agenda to teach students what to think, not how to think. And he went to the well and to committee and said, I was blown away by this free speech, very successful conversation. I was invited to be a part of this. And so when we see trends, when you see trends, you need to be in a meeting with those individuals. You need to be in conversation saying, this is not who we are, just making sure you're aware. Other states are talking about this. Let's have a conversation. The proactive discussions, the deep relationships, I think have served us well, and I think that would be how we would continue the course of action.
Yeah, so as I do national work, I'm always talking about passion versus purpose and ego versus intent. And so
Okay, you preaching.
do we want to take a defensive posture, or do we want to take an educational posture? So that is one of the things that I appreciate. And so, Jim, as we think about running a system with a lot of different types of institutions, you have HBCUs in your system, you have MSIs, PWIs, et cetera. How do you, as a leader of a system, manage that? Because, you know, people are anxious. I mean, we can't pretend like people aren't anxious whenever you have, you know, change in legislation and leadership. So how are you managing that part of the work?
Well, it's a couple of different strategies in that regard. So we are a system of 9 institutions, but they're 9 distinct institutions. Each has its own history, its own culture, its own mission. And so we leverage that towards some collective outcomes, but we also empower our university presidents. And our newest one, Kathy Johnson from University of New Orleans, is here. Kathy, welcome. She'll learn this, yeah. She, to implement the frameworks that we create, systemic frameworks, in a way, in a manner that is specific to the context of their institution. We think it's very important that we do that because the context at Grambling State University in the Piney Woods is quite different than it is at UL Lafayette or Carnegie R1 institution on the Bayou in Lafayette. And so we allow them, and what that does is it fosters ownership. So now they own it. Now, we do have systemic initiatives, and Commissioner Reed mentioned our Black Male Initiative. It's called the Reginald F. Lewis Program. It's designed after a Black billionaire who grew up in inner city Baltimore, first person ever admitted to Harvard Law School without applying, became a Wall Street lawyer, saw all the white guys making all the money, so he decided to create what's called the leveraged buyout and purchased $1 billion food conglomerate in Europe. Self-starter all the way. He owned his future. Conspiracy of circumstance, I meet his widow. We asked her if we can use her husband as example to have a Black male initiative across our system. And then we have 18 rising sophomores, 2 from each of our institutions that are identified because they have that something, that spark, whether it's shown in leadership or an academic success, whatever it is, they have that something. We put them through a curated educational experience. It includes mentorships, internships, study abroad. We took them all to listen to lectures at Sorbonne, University of Paris last year. We're sipping champagne at the Eiffel Tower. It was beautiful.
Not this Eiffel Tower.
Not this one, the real one. And, but what these young men have become are force multipliers on our campuses because they've gone back and they've created initiatives on their own campuses that reflect the spirit of that campus. And using that, leveraging the resources that we have to advance this work, I think is going to be absolutely key. And then it allows us to create these wonderful success stories that we can bring to even cynical legislators who say, why are we doing this work? Say, here's the reason. Look at Jaderick Talbert. Look at him talking about the rise of Black farmers and populist movements in the 19th century. Oh, by the way, that created Grambling State University in the Piney Woods. So it's a comprehensive, I think, holistic approach to these conversations that's really paid dividends so far.
I want to add to that, this idea, I want to build on Jim's great comments about this idea of common purpose and common vision in a world where we have so much division. Every legislator, we believe that we can find a common conversation with every legislator in Louisiana.
That's right.
And when we are, Toya, to your point about education and purpose, right? So when we are in conversations and we say, you remember who we are, we're the individuals who move people from poverty to prosperity. We're the individuals that help people get an industry-based certification and be alignment and make sure that the bipartisan infrastructure bill means our people are laying the fiber for cybersecurity and making sure bridges are safe. You remember who we are. We create more engineers. And we're creating more doctors. And doesn't your local community need more nurses? That's what we do. We produce teachers. That's what we do. And so when you say to an individual who is working diligently on behalf of their constituents, we have a common purpose with you because whatever you're trying to do in your community, build talent, decrease poverty, decrease crime, increase life expectancy, increase taxpayers, that's what we do. And I think you have to find that common purpose and that common vision, which allows you to have a conversation from a proactive perspective, not a reactive perspective. Right,
I love
Jim?
that. I love that. Yeah, perfect. Well said.
So, as I travel to other states, and a lot of people are trying to grapple with this issue around DEI, there are risks at every level. And so, can you talk about the risk from where you sit? So y'all know, even in the state of Louisiana, y'all heard me say y'all, even in the state of Louisiana, we say we're so different from other states. But in reality, we're not, Kim, because everything that you mentioned about what we stand for, I know other states stand for the same thing. But I do hear in conversation that there is a risk factor in this work. And if you could speak about the risk of the commitment to DEI by serving all students as a SHIO and then as a system leader, what does that look like? And what should your colleagues who sit in these similar positions consider as they think about levels of risk?
So one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and I think a little perplexing, Jim, was that when we were going through our hearing, so many people said to us, no one in the country is talking about this. They're letting these bills roll through the process without going to the table. No one is engaging their legislative leadership. Where are the higher ed leaders? It's crickets, which is why I think we're sitting on this panel, because they said, is anybody talking about and having a conversation about this? And so I think for us, the risk was being silent.
That's right.
And allowing people to project on us something that we are not. And on our faculty and staff who work tirelessly, something that they are not. That was, to me, how I thought about risk. Now, I have absolutely been in conversations with higher education leaders across the country who have said, our budget was cut, our budget was threatened, this is hardball politics, there's some serious conversations going on. What did you see? And I said, we didn't see that, but we did go to our leadership in advance and say, please don't file the bill, please don't schedule the bill. And when the bill was scheduled, we had pre-conversations to say, here's what we're going to say respectfully, and here's why we need to do that. So it was a different tone, a different tenor, a different reality. But I think for Jim and Monty and I, we saw the risk was being silent and allowing more people to erode trust and confidence in our institutions in a world that is built on a knowledge economy where people need access to our credentials more than ever before.
And I don't want to make this sound too simplistic, because I know that there are very capable people leading these conversations in other states, and I don't want to dismiss their work. But I think one of the things that we didn't do is we didn't allow somebody to frame the conversation and then try to operate within that false frame, right? We explained what the conversation really is about. And that helped us. When you don't let someone say, hey, this is the battlefield and we're going to go to war on, and instead say, you know what, no, we're going to educate you about what this is. Did the same thing with tenure. We had a legislator would bring a tenure bill up, and I said, hey, would you be willing to meet with me about this bill? And he says, of course. And I said, okay, I'm going to bring some friends. And I brought my 9 faculty senate presidents and 3 from the LSU system, and we sat down and we had a conversation. And to start the conversation, I said, Senator, I said, explain to this group what it is that you're trying to achieve. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And it was a very cordial conversation. By the end of it, he decided not to file his bill, because he realized that there really wasn't a problem. Folks, here's the challenge we face now with ubiquitous access to media in our hands, is that facts don't change opinions, memes do. And when you can put something in a meme that's compelling, it reinforces someone's intuition, where they want to believe. And when you see something that conflicts with what you want to believe to be true, your brain processes it in the same part of the brain that processes pain signals. So think about this. When you put your hand on a hot stove, do you rationalize why your hand is hurting? No, you immediately lift your hand out because you want it to stop immediately. When you get someone tells you something and it conflicts with what you want to believe to be true, you don't try to rationalize and get your arms around it, you dismiss it. And so when you have algorithms that are constantly reinforcing your notions of what you want to believe to be true, because that's who your network is, these things become so deeply entrenched, you don't want to listen to rationalization. When you can find the context, the arena, the forum to eliminate that human bias, that human tendency, and have rich, thoughtful conversations with people, find ways to empathize with their position, and then walk them through to the logical conclusion, it works so much better than trying to go to war over something that's an anomaly, that's a caricaturation of what you're trying to accomplish.
So to me, that speaks to messaging. And so when you think about the stakeholders, the partners in all of this, how did you all manage the messaging around the framing? How did you get to that? Because the other thing that I see is some systems are trying to go out on their own. The SHIELD's office may be doing different messaging, a different set of institutions within the state may be doing a whole nother set of those messages that are going out. So how did you all get everybody on the same page?
So let me jump in before the commissioner does, because she won't take the credit for it. But because you have to, so our Board of Regents is a coordinating board, and part of that coordination is to coordinate 4 ego-driven system presidents, right, that have all of the answers. And we can all be parochial, because I'm judged by the success of my system, not the success of higher education for the state of Louisiana. So when you have somebody that's at the SHIO level who's able to balance that and say, okay, guys, where is the common ground? Where are the places we can come together and have a unified front, a unified voice? And where is there room for you to have a voice that's specific to your system or to your board, which is a body corporate, which is its own standalone entity? And how do those things coexist? And by having those conversations, candid conversations where none of us are pulling punches, we're able to dive in deep. We trust each other enough to have the conflict associated with that when we walk away from the table, from that room, and go to the table that's forward-facing in the public, we're all singing from the same page of the hymnal, at least the same hymnal, if not the same page. And it works in harmony. It can only happen if you have someone that is willing to lead the tough conversations behind the scenes, that we can do that in public. So I want to thank the commissioner for leading that work in just an exemplary fashion.
So that also, though, takes me to other stakeholder groups. So we have advocacy groups in the state. We have alumni in our state. We talked a little bit about student engagement, but how do we see engaging all of these other stakeholders? Because they could be rogue too, right? And so you all may be going in one direction, but an advocacy group, and I do see this sometimes, may be going in a different direction, or they may think that you're not standing up strongly enough around the issue.
Yes, I do think that it is true that I have been in conversations, I'm sure Jim has as well, with individuals who feel that our approach has been aggressive enough, right? That we have not been as pointed about racial equity, calling out very specific things. And what I have always said is, it's not about the words, it's about the work. And so we do have to find common ground in this work if we want to bring more people to the conversation. Our job is not to shake it up in such a way that we're increasing the division. Our job is to go to the Capitol and to be public spokespersons and advocates for higher education and opportunity so that more people see themselves in this work. And so individuals who have the purse strings of the state or the federal government say, we want to invest in that. And you don't do that when you cause people to be in their corners, right? I do get it. I do understand that there are people who feel that the Supreme Court decision around not using race as a factor is a battleground that we need to take on. Jim and I spent a half an afternoon or a whole day saying, Louisiana has no institution that uses race as a factor for admission. That's Harvard, right? Harvard with their endowment, Harvard with their legacy scholarships, Harvard with it. Our public institutions are the workhorses for educational attainment. We produce opportunity at scale, right? Harvard is not producing the level of educational opportunity for minority students that our institutions are doing, and yet we get swept into those conversations. And so I do understand that people feel that at this moment in time, more has to be done, that we're losing the argument about the importance of equity of opportunity. I understand that. But our job is to make sure we're bringing more people to the table. We're educating and inviting more people to be a part of who we are and what we're trying to do. And it's a different role for us. But I do appreciate you bringing that up, Toya, because I do many times, and I'm sure Jim as well, go to conferences or events where people are sort of agitators. They're like, come on, let's do more, let's say more, let's get out there, let's write more op-eds, let's go scorched earth, right? Let's make sure that we are articulating as forcefully as possible why this work matters. And I say to them, I think our plan is working. We are getting increased funding for higher ed. More people understand talent development than ever before, and that's our job. Our job is to bring more people in, not to repel more people out.
Yeah, and I think there's a draw sometimes on these national issues that dominate the headlines. And there's not a time that I don't read something inside higher ed that I was a journalism undergrad. I want to sit down and write an op-ed about it. And I said, but why? That's not an issue that I'm dealing with. And she's exactly right. I can't tell you the number of reporters that called me the day the Supreme Court opinion came out. Right. And I forget how many pages it was, like 100 and something pages. Yep. And they called me within minutes of it being released. And I said, have you read the decision? Well, no, not yet. I say, so how are you asking informed questions about something you haven't even read? I'm reading it now. And what I've read so far has nothing to do with anything we're doing in Louisiana. And so it's a distraction for me to even be engaged in this conversation. We're doing things to advance our population in Louisiana. We want them to be competitive. You know, there's a tract here around artificial intelligence. We're trying to forward a population that is living in a state that has historically been driven by agriculture, right, water, and petroleum, right? And you think about the work that occurs in agriculture, on the water, and in petroleum. It's fundamentally changed already. It's going to continue to change because of advances in technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, automation. We're trying to prepare a population that has a strong work ethic to have the core competencies necessary to thrive in that world. We don't have time for distractions because this is generational work that we're leading. And we can engage in the national conversation on these divisive issues that get clicks. But we're not after clicks. We're after taxpayers. We're after contributing citizens to our communities,
Amen.
And that's the focus.
Amen.
Which actually, so you opened this up around business and industry. So what do you see as the role of our business and industry partners when we are talking about DEI and when we're talking about serving all citizens in the state of Louisiana? And Commissioner, when we talk about our strategic plan for the state, how do we see business and industry supporting what we're doing, and how do we use them as advocates in this work?
I think business and industry is critical to this work, critical champions for talent development. I can't think of a conversation that I've had recently with business and industry leader that did not have a diversity conversation in it, right? They want diverse engineers, diverse HR, diverse IT. They're looking for those professionals. And so they are perfect individuals to lead the charge for why this work matters. And they see this work as really the talent war conversation. It's not a culture war conversation for them. It's a talent war conversation. And they're saying, can we produce more? Can we produce more? And in Louisiana, where we have I think the lowest workforce participation rate in the nation, we need more people to have college and career experiences in high school. We need every college student to have a relevant, meaningful work-based learning experience. And so the connection with business and industry all along that continuum is important, because I see Joe Garcia here, and we talked about conversations in Colorado about blurring lines between K-12 and higher ed in the world of work, and the white-collar apprenticeship programs there through CareerWise. This is the same conversation we're trying to have here in Louisiana. This idea that we are all in it together, and that we are advocating in a way that is meaningful and relevant and allows more people to have opportunity than ever before.
Toy, if I can,
Yes.
so there's a moral component to DEI work, and I subscribe to that. I think that it's important that every individual has the same opportunity to control their economic and social self-determination, that they can make of themselves the best iteration of themselves, and everyone should have equal opportunity to do that. But business and industry also understands the business imperative behind DEI. So if you don't subscribe to the moral piece, that's fine, that's your business. You better understand the business imperative of it, because we're serving a more diverse clientele than ever before, whether you're in higher education, whether you're Shell, Exxon, Turner Industries, some of the big industries in the state of Louisiana. They've got some of the most progressive diversity, equity, and inclusion statements, far more than we do at our institutions, because they understand if they're going to be successful in business, they've got to expand their operations to a workforce that looks like Louisiana, that looks like their consumer base. They get it. They own it. And so they're able to rise above any of the political conversations around the misinformation, if you will, and they're focused on doing the work that's going to advance their institutions. Their stockholders are demanding it. So I believe the populace is a little bit more woke than we might have imagined.
Well, I always joke about the fact that when we're talking to business and industry partners, that they do understand that black and white equals green. They definitely understand that.
Yes.
So let's talk about, so we're here at the CCA meeting, and we're talking about how do we move forward. What do you see as the role of organizations like Complete College America in the work that we do?
So, you know, one thing that I always say about CCA is it's a pep rally for educational attainment. The energy and the passion of having 1,000 people who care about this work, I think, is important. So I think CCA is a place where you can convene like-minded people that are working and struggling in the same way, to be together and sort of workshopping and trying to find paths that to move the work forward. CCA can certainly lift things that are best and promising practices so that others can connect with individuals who are doing that work. And I think it is important for national organizations and people who have bigger megaphones to set the conversation right, to Jim's point about the caricature versus who we are. So the bigger the platform, the bigger the opportunity, I think, to step out there to say, this is who we are, and this is the work that we do each and every day. That is not what we are. This is who we are. And so I appreciate CCA for having that commitment, and I certainly look to see even more national organizations use that megaphone and that platform to make sure that we're setting this course for who we are and setting the conversation right.
And when they can gather us all in these quaint, austere surroundings, in a distraction-free environment, this is the perfect place to have these conversations. But in all seriousness, I think it's great when professionals of like minds can escape from the daily grind and come together and say, you know what, I'm not alone in this work. And I think there's power in numbers, and that's one of the great convening aspects of an organization like CCA, is to bring these folks together and advance the common work for us. So I thank them for doing that.
And it's not lost on us, Jim or I or you, Toya, that we were on the Stan Jones stage.
That's right.
A
Exactly.
giant in higher education, right? A real trailblazer when others were not doing work. He was saying, this is what matters, and this is where we need to be.
So there's one other group that we haven't discussed, which actually is supporting CCA in this effort, and that they're the funders. Mm-hmm. So I've been to several meetings where I've heard individuals who are committed to this work, specifically committed to student success, say we need other organizations, especially foundations, to provide a level of cover for us to continue to do this work. So what do you all see as the role of foundations and funders in this DEI conversation?
Well, the states are not going to be the solution, right? We've seen state investment in higher education continue to dwindle. When funders like those that are behind this movement put their money into purposes with which they agree, it enables us to do work at a much larger scale. And I think we've advanced the scale two, threefold. We have to do it exponentially if we're going to be successful. We've seen, if you look at it as a national movement, we've seen our nation's competitive advantage erode away over the years. We've seen other nations realize that American prosperity was driven by investment in our people. And as we're disinvesting, we're starting to see additional investments come from other actors. So it's the role of these private funders to step up and say, you know what, hey, we're going to own this. We're going to own this challenge. We're going to define it with clarity. We're going to develop interventions that are designed to closing these gaps, and we're going to put our money where it's going to make the biggest difference. And when you see the work of CCA and other types of movements of this kind, and you see the investments of the philanthropic community and others that are investing in the future for our people, that's a pretty rewarding place to be.
I would only add that the only thing better than having your own megaphone is your own money and your own megaphone, right? So you can really define the conversation. So I would say ditto to Jim's point, but I would say add scale and sustain it,
That's it.
right? So let's not do sort of project du jour. If this is the big moment and we need to drive it, then please stay the course and help us to move the work forward. And thank you for those funders that are actually doing that.
So Nia, do I have 15 minutes to open up to the audience who may have a question? Okay, 5 minutes. Anybody in the audience that has a specific burning question for, yes, I see a hand right here.
Good afternoon. Dr. Jones from Baton Rouge Community College. First, let me say how much I enjoyed, Dr. Teamer, you moderating, and to the leaders on the panel for your thought leadership, for being radical leaders in this space, because that's what it takes. After being gone for many years and coming back to Louisiana and then serving in different roles, political and education now, I continue to still be a little disheartened by the rankings that we have for our state, as I'm sure you all do. And so just looking at the 2023 rankings, Louisiana is still in the bottom, unfortunately, in education, number 50, in infrastructure and economy, number 49, so on and so forth. My question to you, when it comes to this DE&I space, which I'm passionate about, poverty reduction, could and should DE&I become a value statement throughout our industries, throughout education? Is that even possible to embed that in? Because we're not talking about fairness for just minorities, we're talking about advancement for every rural community, for every location in our state. Could we get to that point where people recognize a common narrative in this space? That's the question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the common narrative can take root. It's going to be nuanced such that each population is going to be articulated in a way that's specific to that population. But you framed it very well when you look at Louisiana's rankings across any number of indicators of social health. We rank near the bottom. Also rank near the bottom in terms of investments, state investments in higher education, even when you include the $300 million a year we put into TOPS.
Right.
And so I say quite often, if you want to see what an organization values, look at its budget.
Right.
And so when we look at the budget of Louisiana, we've budgeted more in corrections historically than just about any other state in the union. We've incarcerated more people. We have more black males incarcerated than we have enrolled in higher education. Those are, you can't look at those individually, but you can lump them all together and say, you know what, we've got a problem with prioritization in Louisiana. It's like if we have serious people at the table talking about what are the things we can advance. Commissioner Reed mentioned workforce participation rates. We have the lowest in the nation, but we have some census tracts in Louisiana where fewer than 22% of the working age population is actively in the workforce. That's a problem. There's not a single answer to that, There's multiple answers that are deep-rooted and generational in impact. But being very specific in determining what those problems are, and then being very targeted in the solutions, I think will help. But having a global narrative that says we're going to advance Louisiana, which means we're going to advance the people of Louisiana, I think helps. DEI has got to be a component to that. That's fair.
I would agree. I think Jim is exactly right. I think you have to pick language that brings more people to the table, which is why we pick prosperity in our strategic plan that we work collectively on and collaboratively on. And so I think language matters. Inspiring people to be a part of something bigger than themselves has to be something that they want to rally around. So I agree. I think he's absolutely right. There is a way for us to have the kind of messaging that allows more people to understand how to be empowered to make change, to move people from poverty. But the language would be something that would have to be broad enough for more people to say, I know exactly what that is. I think DEI is so hijacked for so many people that you spend so much time trying to say, that's not what it is, this is what it is, that you go, okay, new word. It's like Swiffer. You have to create a word, right? You need a new word. So if it's opportunity, if it's prosperity, whatever it is, sometimes it's easier to say, let's pick a uniting word or message as opposed to trying to educate people on the words that they don't agree on.
One more question, Eve? One more question. Anyone in the audience?
Margaret.
First of all, I'd be remiss if I sat here and just not say how excited and proud and happy. On the day I read that legislation, I read what you guys had done. I actually spoke to Monty, and I did speak to Kim. I don't know if I spoke to you, Kim, directly, but you know, this was way beyond what I had seen. Or maybe it was some of this work that you all both started, because yeah, we do have this long, long history, and we know each other's career. And I just say to continue to work, Madam Commissioner, continue to do what you do in bringing people together and making people focus on the work and not the words, because that is really what it's gonna take. And Jim, as you go, stay close to her, because I know you're gonna make a move. Stay close to her, because we need to continue to build those kind of contingencies to move us forward, Dr. Jones. And we're not gonna see the progress unless we keep people like you guys getting the message out. The messaging is so important. And so I thank you all for that. I thank you for representing us and putting us in a different place, Louisiana First, because I too have been tracking it. I've still remained in education, although I haven't had one of those jobs there. And I'm following, I track everything because it's still so important, the work that you do, moving people forward. Prosperity for all, not some. And so thank you so much for being courageous, taking that courageous step. That's what leadership is about. That's what leadership is about, gang. So I'm talking to some because I'm coaching some people, and leadership is about being courageous. And I thank you so much for that. And we thank CCA for putting this on the radar, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. So I do want us to close out with both of my colleagues answering one final question. What is the most important point you'd each want our audience to take from this conversation?
And I think I've continued to say the work over the words. I think that's the piece that I would want everyone to take. Don't spend your time on defense trying to explain. Spend your time on offense, talking about who you are and why you add value.
And I'd go a little bit political with this, is don't assume the extremes are the majority.
There you go.
The extremes are the minority. They just have microphones and they get amplified. But the vast majority of people want to do what's right, and they're willing to engage in the conversation. So if you approach it as a fight, you're only going to inflame the extremes. But if you approach it as a conversation and an educational moment, then we have the ability to take this more silent majority and advance the work in very meaningful ways for our people. More people want to be involved in the solution than be part of the argument on the fringes. And I think if we remember that, we won't get drawn into these battles that you really can't win, because there's no winner in a war.
Thank you to both of you all. Thank you all for coming and sharing in this conversation. And Nia, thank you for keeping me on track.
So I just want to thank our panelists for sharing this conversation. And I'm going to ask you all to take this charge to heart. And wherever you live, whatever you're doing, remember the importance of the conversation, and be courageous in the work that we're doing. And if you want to connect, that you have questions, please just let us know, and we can work all that stuff out. It is lunch next. I will ask you all to make sure that you fill out your evaluations in the app. So please do that. Enjoy the rest of the conference. If there's any, and I forgot to tell you who I am. I'm Nia Heidel, and so I work with Complete College America as the Vice President of Alliance Engagement and Institutional Transformation. If there's something I can do to support the work that you're doing in your campuses or in your states, please let me know. Thank you all very much.